Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Suspects from Studio H. And Suspects is a mystery game in which you are Claire Harper, taking on a variety of different mysteries, 3 to be exact, at least in this box. I assume more will come. We'll find out. I'm looking forward to them. Minor spoiler, but anyway, Suspects is a mystery game. It's going to be a game that's not that dissimilar to any mystery game or escape room style game that you've played in the past, although very much focusing much more on mystery over escape room, but they all have that overlap of trying to figure things out as you play. Now, I am going to go into how to play this game. In order to do so properly, there'll be the most minor of spoilers for the very first case, really minor spoilers. I'm going to walk you through the first turn or two of how things would play out, just so you understand how the game works. If you want to skip that, just go ahead and jump straight to the review. It's probably about 3 or 4 minutes away from here because there's not a lot to go into. This is a fairly easy game to teach and table. The rulebook is this. That's all we have. We have a single page over here, and you do need to read that, but that's basically about it. Now, in Suspects, the goal of the game is to ideally figure out who did what. You're going to be presented with a case, 3 cases, like I said already. We're going to be looking at murder at Alistair Manor. Now, in this case, we have a murder that occurred. I'm not going to go heavily into the details of the case. You can read that at your leisure to go into it. But you'll also get a set of questions. A set of questions you'll have to answer through, but you have to answer them at different points to score more points. Effectively, the way it works is you have an answer. You have a question, for example, who is the killer? Who committed this crime? Who committed this murder? And if you get it incorrectly, you get 0 points. If you get it correctly, then it depends on when you got it correctly. You see, there's a whole giant stack of cards over here, and if you manage to figure out the answer correctly within the first 30 cards, you'll get 5 points. 31 to 45 cards, 4 points. If you get within 46 or further cards, then 3 points. Now, the way it works is you can modify your guesses as you go. You can say, aha, the butler did it, and write down your answer. And then as you get to card 37, as you're slowly unlocking cards as you play out, you can say, you know what, I changed my mind, it's the grandma. I don't think there's a grandma in this case. But either way, you can go ahead and change your answers as you go. Your last answer is both the one that's locked in, as well as the one that determines how many points it's worth, if you actually, well, get it correctly. And that's the core of the idea of the game. You have a scoring mechanism at the end, depending how many points you score is how well you did, but the general idea is going through 5 or 6 questions, however many the case presents, answering them all as you go through the case, as you explore what happened. That's the scoring, win condition, all of that. The gameplay starts with you being presented with a case. Something happened, and the case will walk you through the next steps. So, for example, in this case, and this is where we start moving into slight spoilers, I'm really just walking you through the first minute of the case here. There's not a lot being spoiled, but in case you care, timestamps down below. You're going to go ahead and flip and get a bit of a family tree over here. You're going to have a family tree that's going to indicate different kinds of people that you can interact with. Now, this is true across the cases, that they're going to have different ways of showing you information, but whenever you have a number next to a person, you can try to find that card in this set over here. So, for example, if I want to talk to Elizabeth Alistair, I'll have to find card 12 in this stack of cards. Now, they're not always obvious in the way they're presented. For instance, the second case is a playwright, and you have to look around at the way the numbers are presented. You want to look for those numbers, but you'll find them. They're not overly hidden, but they're also not always directly obvious as they are over here. From there, we'll get the second piece of information, which is a bit of a house over here, showing us the various locations that we can go through in the manor where the murder happened. Now, in general, there's going to be 3 card types, 3 primary card types. There's going to be people, locations, and items. For example, if I want to go ahead to the drawing room, for example, I can go ahead into the drawing room and find card 22, go ahead and look at the card, and on the reverse side of this card, we'll have potentially different things. I'm not focusing that heavily because of the spoilers aspect, but for example, on the other side of this card, there are various items I can then look at, which I'll then go ahead and find more items. Each of these cards is counting against your score, not inherently counting against your score, but you want to try to lock in your answers before card 30 comes out, so you can be tracking the cards as you go. I recommend a little pad of paper and just little, chicken scratches as you go to indicate the number of cards drawn. From there, you have potentially people. Let's talk about Elizabeth Alistair. In fact, let's actually go to the very first person who greets you. This is not even a choice. You're going to have Thomas Smith, the butler. I told you the butler did it. Thomas Smith over here is going to give you a bit of text, a bit of information, and then potentially other cards that you can then further examine as you go through it. So again, the general idea is you're going through cards that are going to show you more information. They're going to give you story, narrative, into pieces of information, potentially conflicting pieces of information, leading you down a little story of clues and hints and options. There are some mechanisms in which certain things line up with cards. I won't heavily go into it, but for example, Thomas Smith over here, you can see he has 2 lines on the side. Those represent the fact that sometimes you'll find things like gloves or weapons or keys that have to line up. And when things line up correctly, that means it's the right fit. You'll find all that information in the rulebook. Rinse and repeat until you eventually figure out who did what. Who committed the murder? What was their motive? Who is their accomplice? What do they use? All these different things, and the questions will vary by case, but that's effectively what you're trying to do in Suspects. Talk to the various people, figure out the clues, do so in time in order to get as many points as possible, figure out your score, and then move on to the next case. And that's Suspects. Which brings us to the review part of things, starting off with ease of play. Like I said already, rules are practically non-existent. 2 pages to go through, really not a lot. You can dive straight in. You'll take you 10 minutes to get up and running, not even. It'll take you 5 minutes to get up and running, and from there you can dive straight into your first case. Table space can get a little large, especially if you're trying to organize cards. There are a lot of cards here, and so the more cards you go through, again, you can have 45 plus cards on the table. Depending on how you're trying to organize that may take up more room on the table. It's not going to be the end of the world, and frankly, you could play it in a very small space if you're not trying to keep everything in front of you. But if you want that information in front of you, as I do, it'll be a little more table space than you might otherwise anticipate. Game time is going to vary by group. The more players you play with, the more you're going to be passing those cards around, the more players are going to be trying to read the different pieces of information on the cards. As a solo game, I've knocked out a case in 25 minutes. Playing it with 2 players, I knocked out a case in 45 minutes. So you can see how the game time can range, even just on the number of player counts. Past that, as far as player count, speaking of which, is a 1 to 4 player game. I've only played this at 1 and 2 players. Like most games in this genre, that's going to be the sweet spot for me. The 1 player is always a bit of a toss-up. Some games like this work with 1 player, some don't. I find this one works well with 1. In fact, so far, 1 is my preferred player count for this, but I would happily play it with 2 and go through that mystery together. You might notice something I don't, and vice versa. But 3 and 4 starts to become a bit of a conversation around passing cards around, and ends up being more work than I'm looking for the type of game system it is. As far as interaction, it's about finding clues, finding common threads between cards. So having more players means more opportunity to be like, wait a second, he said this and she said that and this happened at that time and they came there. Like, you can figure out more clues with more players, but it's interaction in the sense of just solving a crime together. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, this is a real sense of mystery, starting with what I like, which is the real sense of mystery as you go through it. The cases present you with there's also a degree of interconnectedness between the cases, just little characters you'll find that go from one case to another, but in general, focusing on any individual case, they give you something that happened, and a full dive into a sense of mystery that I would say different escape room games, different mystery games do that to different degrees in terms of involving you in the drama of the situation. Overall, Suspects does a great job involving you in that drama. It does a great job of building the characters, building the backstory, having characters say various things about what they think of other characters, and so you get this real sense of a story and an adventure that happened here. And there's often multiple pathways towards the information that you need. While inherently you have to go through certain cards here and there are different ways you can get to one piece of information versus another. You might find different clues. In fact, when you eventually open this to get the solution, this is what you're going to be opening to get the solution, you'll find that it references, and you know that this, and this happened. See cards 15, 22, and 46. So you'll see that it does often cross-reference certain pieces of information to ensure that it's not just about whether you got that one card, whether you just got lucky or not. And then the story and the motivations and the general world building in this game is very well crafted. And it gives you a lot of red herrings, but red herrings that you can validate or not as you go. There will be conflicting motives as you go through the game. This is not a simple thing where, well, they benefited from their fortune. You're going to dive into this and you're going to see conflicting motives, conflicting reasons, and then ideally pieces of supporting evidence that point more towards one thing versus another. And it's not always obvious either. Sometimes things might be presented in a certain way, but you have to think past that. You have to say, well, I know it's doing this, but it also could mean that. It's hard to really explain that more without getting into spoilers, which I'm going to heavily avoid here. As far as things I don't like, in general, the card counting mechanism for scoring, I don't have an easy way around it, because otherwise, what is the win or lose condition? But I don't love that sense. I don't love the sense of the cards being conflicted. I would say the Unlock series is going to be a good example. The Unlock series doesn't limit your ability to actually dive into things, but it puts a timer on your thing. I think I probably prefer a timer in these kinds of adventures, because I want to see all the cards. I want to talk to you. I want to talk to them. I want to go to those locations. The idea that I'm card counting as I go feels a little anti-thematic, and I'm never really a huge fan of that when it's the timer or win condition mechanism there. It's not the end of the world. At the end of the day, I prefer to solve the case correctly than to score better but get it wrong. So if I need to take those extra 3 cards, I'll go ahead and do so. But there certainly is that little mindfulness of if I go ahead and check out the shed, it's going to be the 31st card, and now suddenly I'm locked in. And so that I don't love. I do like that the game lets you change your guess as you go, so you can kind of lock in your guess and then keep going on the cards, and then from there see if you want to change it. So I do like that they have that as a mechanism. It makes the card counting feel less punishing and more like a reward for just solving it faster. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, those conflicting motives. While I like the nuance and mystery that provides, you may not, especially when combined with things that aren't always obvious. The fact that they might have benefited from the crime, as well as they might have as well, and both of them had access to the weapon, you might find that to be a little frustrating because it's leading you down different pathways, different red herrings along the way. For myself, I enjoy it. I enjoy tying out what did happen as you go through it, but understand the game is going to intentionally try to throw things in your way, which leads to a certain degree of guesswork around what matters at the same time. The aspect of trying to decide whether you go to the drawing room, whether you go to the ballroom, whether you talk to the aunt, whether you talk to the brother, these are all a little bit of guesswork that might lead you towards different clues or different solutions. For myself, the way I like to go through this game so far is going through all of the cards, but just locking in my guesses as I go. That way I could have opportunities to see if, well, something changes based off of finding out new information. As far as final thoughts on rating on Suspects, overall, Suspects doesn't do a lot that's new in the genre. In fact, I would directly compare it to another game, which we'll get to shortly, but it doesn't do a lot that's new in the genre, but it does do a great job with an already existing system of games. The system of mystery games, of detective games, of going through things. The idea of going through different cards and unlocking narratives and having interconnecting stories and conflicting pieces of information, and then doing so in a way that is both elegant, it builds a nice world, it has a world that connects from game to game. Overall, I really enjoy going through these cases. I have a lot of fun with them. At the end of the day, this is a genre that I have a hard time always knowing exactly where I am with it. Ultimately, the game really comes down to reading a book and then trying to figure out the whodunit as you go. They just have a scoring mechanism to kind of turn it into a game as you go through it. Overall, this is a 3.5 out of 5 for me, although to me I think that reflects more the genre than Suspects itself. Suspects itself is one of the better games I've played in this genre once you move out of escape rooms and into detective genres, but overall, really enjoy my time with this one. This is one which I'm happily going to go through every case in this box. Well, I've gone through every case in this box. We'll happily pick up future boxes to go through every case in those boxes as well, because it's fun. It's simple. It gives you enough reason to dive into it, and enough of a well-written, well-done story, well-crafted narrative that incentivized to figure out what happens in all of them. As far as other game recommendations, Crime Zoom from Lucky Duck Games, or distributed by Lucky Duck Games, is going to be very, very similar in the basic game mechanism of counting cards and going through it and using your timer in that sense. And then Chronicles of Crime, also from Lucky Duck, very different in terms of the implementation, but both of them have that same, all three of these games have that same detective mystery solving aspect as you go through and talk to various characters to ultimately solve a crime. Until next time, I am Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this helpful, and as always, have a good one.